Friends, thank you for being here today. The last time the global economy shut down, it took a highly contagious virus. This time, it is taking oil. What is unfolding right now across the burning sands of the Middle East, inside the panicked, closed-door meetings in European capitals, and deep within the highly leveraged corridors of Wall Street, is setting the stage for an economic disruption more severe, more structural, and more devastating than anything we have seen in a generation. You have been told for decades that the modern global economy runs on consumer confidence. You have been told it runs on the spread of democracy. You have been told it runs on the limitless potential of Silicon Valley technology. It does not. It runs on oil. Every factory struggling to stay open in the American Rust Belt, every diesel delivery truck crossing the plains of Ohio, every cargo ship navigating the treacherous waters of the Atlantic, and every heating system required to keep a British or American home from freezing this winter, all of it depends entirely on a fragile, intricately balanced system that is currently collapsing in real time. For decades, there has been a functional, if heavily flawed, architecture that kept that crude oil flowing. It relied on strategic alliances, quiet diplomatic backchannels, overwhelming military deterrence, and a carefully managed balance of power that kept the lights on and the engines running. That system is now under existential strain. Washington just made a geopolitical move to secure that system. Instead, they may have just shattered it beyond repair. Pay attention, because what happens next is not a distant foreign policy abstraction. It directly impacts your wealth, your physical security, your retirement, and the very survival of United States dollar supremacy. To understand how quickly this is unraveling, you have to look at the sheer scale of the initial miscalculation in Washington. For years, the United States and Iran have engaged in a predictable, almost choreographed dance of economic sanctions, proxy skirmishes, and diplomatic ultimatums that ultimately went nowhere. We all know the rhythm of this conflict, but that era of containment is officially over. In recent weeks, this standoff escalated into something qualitatively and structurally different. The administration signaled a direct, unprecedented intention to seize or neutralize Iranian oil infrastructure. Specifically, the crosshairs were placed on Kharg Island. Kharg Island is not just another piece of land, it handles the overwhelming, vast majority of Iran's petroleum exports. It is, in every practical sense, the economic heartbeat of the Iranian state. The message radiating from Washington was brutal and clear. We will not just sanction you, we will cut off your sovereign revenue at the physical source. What happened next inside the Situation Room is a matter of speculation, but what happened next in the global markets is a matter of historical record. The White House anticipated a clean victory. The political narrative assumed that if the U.S. neutralized Iranian exports, alternative supplies would immediately flood the market to stabilize it. They expected the markets to calm down, to respect American military projection, and for prices to drop. More supply stability supposedly equals lower prices. That is basic textbook economics. Instead, the exact opposite happened. Crude oil prices violently spiked. This is the market signal you absolutely must understand. The markets do not lie, and they do not care about political rhetoric. The people with the most money, the most sophisticated data models, and the most at stake, the institutional investors, the elite commodity traders in Geneva and London, the sovereign wealth fund managers in the Gulf, did not believe Washington's plan would work cleanly. If they believed the operation would be a surgical success, the price of crude would have plummeted. Instead, they bought everything they could get their hands on. They did not price in an American victory. They priced in absolute chaos. And when the smartest money in the room, the money that moves global GDP, bets on chaos, you do not listen to press conferences. You look at the math. The math is telling us that the structural integrity of the global energy supply is breaking. Let me pause right here and ask you, do you trust the political narrative coming out of Washington, or do you trust the cold, hard math of the markets? Go to the comments right now and tell me who you believe. While Washington was escalating this crisis, Moscow was quietly watching. And at the exact moment of maximum Western vulnerability, Russia executed a calculated checkmate. Russia announced a deliberate reduction in its oil output. Do not for 1 second believe this was a coincidence or a routine production quota adjustment. Russia has been observing the U.S.-Iran escalation with the extraordinary cold patience of a chess grandmaster, and it moved at precisely the right millisecond. With Iranian supply under direct kinetic threat and global baseline demand still highly robust, a sudden Russian supply reduction does not merely affect prices. It acts as an extreme force multiplier. It amplifies every single inflationary pressure already building inside the global market. The result? We are watching a trajectory pushing crude oil toward the $150 a barrel threshold, a number that fundamentally breaks industrial business models. But it gets worse. Iranian officials have not remained silent. They have explicitly stated their intention to push that number toward $200. Let that number sink in. $200 for a single barrel of oil. At $200 a barrel, the modern economy ceases to function. The reaction to this reality in Brussels, Berlin, Paris, and London is not the usual diplomatic outrage. There are no strongly worded letters being drafted at the UN. There is only panic. It is a quiet, highly controlled institutional panic. Behind closed doors, European officials have been delivering a stark, desperate message to Washington through every available intelligence and diplomatic channel. The message, stripped of polite diplomatic veneer, is essentially this: your military adventure is destroying our economic survival. Europe's energy dependency is not a new phenomenon, but the safety nets are gone. It has been a structural vulnerability for decades, one that was previously masked by cheap, reliable Russian gas imports, partially offset by globalized supply chains, and managed through delicate political agreements that are now fraying at every single edge. With Russian supply deliberately curtailed and Iranian oil under military threat, Europe is staring into an energy abyss it absolutely cannot fill. Look at Germany. The factories in the Ruhr Valley, the historic industrial engine that pulls the entirety of the European Union forward, are no longer operating at full capacity. Energy-intensive manufacturing sectors, chemicals, steel, fertilizers, glass, are already quietly rationing their power consumption. The warnings coming out of European industrial lobbies are not subtle, they are existential. Prolonged disruption means factory shutdowns. Shutdowns mean mass unemployment. Mass unemployment means deep structural recession. And in Europe, severe recession rapidly breeds catastrophic political instability. The transatlantic alliance is currently being strained in a way that goes far beyond NATO budget disputes. European allies are fundamentally questioning the reliability of American leadership. Yet, the physical shortage of crude is just the beginning of the nightmare. The true existential threat to the United States isn't just the skyrocketing price of oil. It's the fundamental change in how that oil is bought, sold, and settled globally. Iran holds the ultimate geopolitical lever, a lever far more powerful than any ballistic missile or naval fleet. They hold a geographic condition, the Strait of Hormuz. Roughly 20% of the entire world's daily oil supply must pass through that narrow, easily targeted waterway. It is the single most strategically significant economic choke point on planet Earth. Iran has not merely threatened to close the strait. Closing it invites total war. Instead, Iran has deployed a strategy of terrifying sophistication. They have signaled that continued safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz may soon come with non-negotiable conditions. And the primary condition? The requirement that energy transactions be settled not in US dollars, but in Chinese yuan. This is the red alert. This is the alarm bell ringing in the deepest vaults of the Federal Reserve. This is not a minor footnote for currency nerds. This is the potential end of the American empire as we know it. If this condition takes hold, if the Gulf states, out of fear, pragmatism, or a desire to pivot east, begin accepting yuan-denominated payments for their crude, it begins the immediate erosion of the foundational pillar of American global power, the petrodollar. The petrodollar system, the unbreakable arrangement forged in the 1970s by which global oil trade flows exclusively through US dollar transactions, has underpinned American financial supremacy for half a century. It is the only reason the United States government can run multi-trillion-dollar deficits without triggering a hyperinflationary currency collapse. Because every nation on Earth needs dollars to buy energy, they must hold U.S. Treasury bonds. This creates artificial permanent demand for our debt. It is why the U.S. Treasury bond remains the world's reserve asset. If you crack that system, even partially, the artificial demand for the dollar evaporates. The structural foundations of American economic hegemony will shift, fracture, and ultimately collapse. Do not think for a moment that Russia and China are merely passive observers to this crisis. They engineered their economies to profit from it. For Russia, the timing is almost surgical. The proxy war in Eastern Europe created enormous diplomatic and economic pressure on Moscow. The West imposed the most sweeping, aggressive financial sanctions in human history, assuming it would crush the ruble. Instead, Russian energy exports were efficiently rerouted to Asia. The political narrative in Europe was one of triumphant decoupling from Russian dependency. Today, that narrative is completely dead, overtaken by harsh physical reality. European energy insecurity has returned with a vengeance, and Russia is once again holding the cards. The higher oil prices go, the stronger Russia's sovereign fiscal position becomes. Every single dollar added to the price of a barrel is a direct, involuntary transfer of wealth from the struggling, energy-consuming economies of the West to the energy-producing economies of the East. Russia did not have to fire a single shot in this specific Middle Eastern conflict. They simply reduced supply, sat back, and watched the mathematics of global demand destroy Western budgets. China's position is even more strategically terrifying. Beijing has been executing a multi-decade, highly disciplined project to dethrone the US dollar. The Yuan-denominated oil settlement now being floated as a condition in the Strait of Hormuz is not a new idea born of this crisis. China has been meticulously building this alternative financial architecture through its cross-border payment systems and bilateral energy deals for years. The current military escalation is simply serving as the catalyst, accelerating a global financial transition that was already underway. Simultaneously, look at the gold markets. China has been aggressively, quietly hoarding massive physical gold reserves at the People's Bank of China. They have been intentionally pushing global gold prices higher as dollar-denominated assets lose their credibility. As U.S. equities decline under the weight of inflation, as the dollar weakens against hard assets, as global confidence in American economic stewardship falters, gold rises. And China holds the gold. This is not a coincidence. This is not a market anomaly. This is a highly coordinated macroeconomic strategy unfolding in real time, designed to insulate the East while the West consumes itself in inflation and debt. I want to hear from the realists in this audience. Do you believe the US dollar will lose its global reserve status within the next 5 years? Drop a yes or no in the comments right now and tell me why. This is a crucial debate. Iran's posture throughout this ordeal has surprised many Western analysts who expected rash, suicidal retaliation. Instead, Iran has demonstrated a calculated lethal patience. They know they cannot win a symmetric, conventional military war against the United States. So they have chosen an asymmetric, economic war. They threaten the strait, they absorb kinetic strikes, yet they sustain their offensive capability. More importantly, they are building quiet, pragmatic understandings with neighboring Gulf states to fracture the US-led coalition. Look at their reported quiet accommodations with Qatar. Qatar hosts the Al Udeid Air Base, the largest US military installation in the entire Middle East. But Qatar is also deeply pragmatic. They are one of the world's largest exporters of liquefied natural gas. Their entire national wealth is acutely sensitive to regional destabilization. By signaling a degree of restraint toward Qatar while maintaining relentless pressure on US and Israeli assets, Iran is effectively isolating Washington. They are creating the geopolitical space to eventually demand a political settlement on their own terms. And make no mistake, the day Iran finally comes to the negotiating table, they will not come alone. Russia and China will be standing right behind them, formally or informally. The terms of that peace will not be dictated in English, and they will not be priced in dollars. We cannot afford to view this as a distant geopolitical chess match, because the physical reality is already crashing into the American homeland. What we are witnessing is a catastrophic supply chain cascade. The mainstream financial media is entirely missing the secondary crisis brewing beneath the surface of the headline military conflict. This is about to hit your wallet, your business, and your community with devastating, undeniable force. The financial signals are flashing red. The U.S. equity markets are volatile, but look specifically at the sectors most exposed to energy costs and complex global supply chains. Technology companies, the supposed saviors of the American stock market, depend entirely on hyper-complex, fragile supply chains for semiconductors, rare earth materials, and precision manufacturing. These companies are now facing compounding, insurmountable headwinds. Chip manufacturers, particularly the foundational foundries in Taiwan, have recently flagged a developing severe shortage in highly specific industrial gases. I am talking about materials like ultra-pure helium and neon, which are absolutely critical to the extreme ultraviolet lithography required for semiconductor fabrication. This is not a front-page story on the nightly news yet, but it has enormous, terrifying downstream implications. Semiconductors are the fundamental building blocks of all modern manufacturing. If you constrain chip production, you do not just delay the release of a new smartphone. The ripple effects violently touch every single industry that depends on advanced electronics, which, in the 21st century, is essentially every industry on Earth. Consumer electronics, aviation components, advanced medical devices, and heavy automotive manufacturing will all be severely affected. Major technology and industrial companies have already begun issuing quiet earnings guidance that reflects deep supply chain uncertainty. If these supply warnings materialize into actual physical production halts, the economic consequences will be severe. Factories will idle, shifts will be cut. We are looking at a cascading dynamic of industrial failure building right beneath the surface. Let us be brutally direct about what these macroeconomic dynamics mean at the level of your lived experience. In the United Kingdom, energy prices have already been a source of immense political and economic trauma over the past 3 years. Households have been stretched to their absolute breaking point. Small businesses, the backbone of the economy, have absorbed brutal, unrelenting cost increases just to keep the lights on. The recovery from that period was incredibly fragile. A renewed, massive spike in oil and natural gas prices, particularly as the bitter cold of winter approaches, will be utterly devastating for the middle class and the most economically vulnerable. We will see businesses simply hand in the keys and walk away. Here in the United States, the impact will be felt most immediately and painfully at the gas pump and in your winter heating bills. But the second-order effects are far more dangerous to your wealth. Higher energy costs immediately translate into higher agricultural production costs. Fertilizer, diesel for tractors, logistics. That translates to exploding prices at the grocery store. Higher diesel prices mean every single item delivered by an 18-wheeler to a Walmart or a Home Depot will cost more. The inflation that the Federal Reserve has aggressively, desperately tried to control by hiking interest rates is about to re-accelerate with a vengeance. We are staring down the barrel of 1970s-style stagflation. Stagnant economic growth combined with explosive, runaway inflation. This destroys the purchasing power of your retirement savings overnight. But to truly grasp the sheer magnitude of the danger we are facing, we must look at the trap that has just been sprung on the Federal Reserve and the American banking system. You see, the politicians in Washington and the central bankers in New York have spent the last 2 decades operating under a fundamental delusion, the belief that they can print their way out of any crisis. If the stock market drops, they print money. If a pandemic hits, they print money. If a regional bank fails, they print money. But you cannot print barrels of crude oil. You cannot print ultra-pure industrial gases. You cannot print physical energy. When oil surges toward $150 or $200 a barrel, it creates a massive, unstoppable wave of cost push inflation. This places the Federal Reserve in an impossible, mathematically unsolvable dilemma. If they choose to lower interest rates and inject liquidity to save the collapsing stock market and prevent a recession, they will pour gasoline on the inflationary fire. We wouldn't just be looking at the 8 or 9% inflation we saw recently. We would be staring down the barrel of 15 or 20% structural inflation. The US dollar would enter a death spiral, accelerating the exact de-dollarization agenda that Beijing and Moscow are pushing. On the other hand, if the Federal Reserve chooses to fight that energy-driven inflation by aggressively hiking interest rates, or even just keeping them elevated for a prolonged period, they will detonate the largest financial time bomb in American history, the commercial real estate and regional banking sectors. Right now, as we speak, hundreds of mid-sized American banks are sitting on hundreds of billions of dollars in unrealized losses. They are holding toxic, overvalued commercial real estate loans for office buildings and retail centers that are already struggling to generate revenue. Now, inject a $200 barrel of oil into that equation. Businesses shut down, tenants default on their leases, the commercial properties become practically worthless. The regional banks that hold those loans become instantly insolvent. We are not talking about the failure of 1 or 2 mismanaged banks in Silicon Valley. We are talking about a systemic, cascading liquidity crisis across the entire American financial plumbing. And sitting directly above this fragile banking sector is the ultimate elephant in the room, the United States sovereign debt. The national debt is hurtling past $34 trillion. Even before this current geopolitical crisis, the interest payments alone on that debt were quietly surpassing the entire budget of the United States military. If inflation forces interest rates higher, the cost of servicing that astronomical debt becomes mathematically impossible. The U.S. Treasury will be forced to issue more debt just to pay the interest on the old debt, borrowing at increasingly punitive rates, while the Petrodollar system that usually buys that debt is actively being dismantled in the Strait of Hormuz. This is what a sovereign debt death spiral looks like. And who pays the absolute highest price for this monumental failure of leadership? You do. The collateral damage of this Federal Reserve trap will be the American retirement system. Pension funds, 401ks, and fixed income portfolios are entirely reliant on the illusion of stability in the bond market and the constant upward trajectory of equities. When inflation erodes the currency and a liquidity crisis crushes the markets, the generational wealth of the American middle class doesn't just decline, it evaporates. This isn't just about paying double at the gas station. This is about the systematic destruction of your life's work, engineered by a political class that completely misunderstood the physical realities of the world they were trying to control. If you are retired or nearing retirement, are you actively restructuring your assets to protect against this exact stagflation trap? Share your thoughts and strategies in the comments. We need to pool our collective wisdom right now. The scenario currently being discussed by serious institutional analysts, not fringe internet commentators, but the people who manage billions of dollars in risk, is a forced return to a state of constrained mobility. I'm not talking about a government-mandated pandemic lockdown. I'm talking about an economic lockdown, something structurally identical in its effect on your life. We are facing a reality of drastically reduced industrial activity, constrained commercial transportation, entire sectors operating at half capacity, and small businesses closing their doors or severely reducing hours. This will not be driven by public health mandates. It will be driven by the sheer mathematical reality of energy costs that make normal human operations economically unviable. You will not be legally ordered to stay home. You simply will not be able to afford to leave. This is not fear-mongering speculation. The physical conditions that produce that exact outcome are measurable, the data is available, and all the metrics are currently moving violently in the wrong direction. As this harsh economic reality sets in, the domestic political consensus required to sustain Washington's military posture is completely disintegrating before our eyes. Opposition to this conflict is no longer confined to traditional fringe anti-war constituencies on the political left. Today, highly influential voices from across the entire political spectrum are sounding the alarm. This includes powerful factions within the corporate business community, seasoned veterans within the military intelligence establishment, and deep within the conservative working-class base of the Republican Party. They are raising frantic alarms about catastrophic strategic overreach. Historically, American military operations have only been sustainable, both economically and politically, when they were clearly framed to the public as necessary, proportionate, and achievable. The current operation in the Middle East is increasingly being recognized, even by its early supporters, as absolutely none of those things. The public protests in the streets are massive and growing. The economic anxiety sitting around the American kitchen table is real, palpable, and justified. The military outcomes on the ground are ambiguous at best and disastrous at worst. And the international coalition that would normally provide the United States with diplomatic legitimacy and financial burden sharing is either completely absent or openly, bitterly critical of Washington's actions. Our European allies are not simply expressing polite disagreement at diplomatic summits. They are actively conducting their own cold, calculated strategic assessments about their future. They are questioning the fundamental reliability of American global leadership. They are asking themselves whether the transatlantic security architecture, the very alliance that has defined Western geopolitics and safety since 1945, still functions as advertised. When Berlin and Paris start asking those questions, they are not small debates. They are generational shifts in the global balance of power. Friends, here is the unvarnished truth you must take away from everything we have covered today. We are not watching a contained, localized regional conflict in the desert. We are watching a live, high-stakes stress test of the entire global economic system. It is a test that is brutally exposing deep structural vulnerabilities that have been accumulating, ignored by politicians, for decades. The United States is currently engaged in a military operation whose immense economic consequences are reverberating through physical energy markets, global currency markets, equity markets, and the most critical manufacturing supply chains on Earth, all simultaneously. The political architects who designed this strategy appear to have entirely arrogantly underestimated the massive systemic fragility of the system they were about to stress test. Russia and China did not have to drop a bomb. They have positioned themselves, not through brash military action, but through calculating strategic patience and decades of structural economic preparation, to benefit immensely from every single additional degree of instability Washington creates. They are not driving this crisis. They simply built their bunkers, hoarded their gold, secured their supply lines, and waited. They are ready for this structural shift in ways that the heavily indebted, politically divided West currently is not. Iran, despite all the military and economic damage it has absorbed, has not been neutralized as a strategic, rational actor. It has adapted. It is precisely targeting Western economic infrastructure. It is leveraging its control over the Strait of Hormuz to threaten the dollar. It is building quiet, effective diplomatic coalitions. It is waiting. And the markets, the honest, ruthless, unsentimental, profit-motivated global markets, are telling you exactly what they think the probability of a quick, clean American resolution is. They think the probability is practically zero. The next several months will be the most critical period in modern economic history. The irrevocable decisions made in the halls of Washington, the boardrooms of Brussels, the bunkers of Tehran, and the palaces of Moscow and Beijing over the coming weeks will determine our fate. They will determine whether this precarious situation eventually stabilizes, or if it accelerates relentlessly towards something genuinely historic, devastating, and irreversible in its severity. You need to prepare. Look at your portfolios. Understand your exposure to fiat currency, to energy costs, and to the fragility of the banking system. We will be watching the data, we will be reporting the facts, and we will bring you every single development as it unfolds. We will do it clearly, strategically, and without the political noise that clouds your judgment. Before you go, I demand to hear from you. Weigh the evidence I have presented and answer me this. First question. Do you believe the global economy is already fractured, locked into the early, inescapable stages of an oil-driven crisis? Or do you genuinely believe the politicians in Washington still have the competence to manage this fallout? Tell me exactly where you stand in the comments. Second question. If the worst-case scenario hits, if oil reaches $200 per barrel and stays there, locking down the global economy, which power structure do you think absorbs the most catastrophic damage and breaks first? Is it the debt-laden United States, the deindustrializing European Union, or the emerging economies of the global South? Drop your answers below. Do not hold back. This is exactly the kind of hard, unsparing debate that sharpens everyone's thinking in times of crisis. If you value the truth over the narrative, if you enjoyed this deep dive analysis, make sure to like the video, leave your comment, and subscribe to the channel right now. Don't forget to absolutely smash the bell icon so you never miss any of our upcoming critical reports. The world is changing fast, and you cannot afford to be blind. Take good care of yourselves, protect your families, and thank you for watching.